There will come a point where no job is needed. You can have a job if you want to have a job. The AI will be able to do everything.
AI could wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs in the next 1 to 5 years.
I don't know if any of you have used one of these like AI customer support bots, but it's incredible.
Welcome to AI Unplugged, the future of work, unlocking the promise and peril of the algorithmic age.
Welcome, a very warm welcome to AI Unplugged, the future of work, where we're going to take a hard look at how the rise of artificial intelligence is going to impact you, your family, your career, the companies that we work at, the society in which we live, the policy implications, the implications for organized labor. We're going to take a real 360 run at this question of AI and how it's going to change the future of work.
And because neither of us are experts, we're going to have some experts, some real serious thinkers, folks who've reflected on this, from leading business executives, policymakers, technologists, labor leaders, and even a chess grandmaster or two if we can get them to return our phone calls. We're going to tackle what we as workers and voters in this democratic republic should do to ready ourselves and ready our society for what is coming and coming fast.
So, Deval, there certainly are no shortage of opinions on AI.
Oh my, and they fall across a very broad spectrum. You know, at one extreme, we have the happier folks, the utopians who see AI as a catalyst for this explosive economic growth, this groundbreaking scientific discovery, and perhaps even human immortality. I'm not sure how they get to that, but there you are. That's one extreme.
And on the other, there's the doomers. The doomers who think that AI is going to be an unrestrained job killer. It's going to, hit us soon and hit us hard. And that are, folks that are worried that we don't have the kinds of institutions in place, the kinds of, policies in place, the kinds of responses from companies that you'd like to expect that are, that could soften that blow. And I must admit, Deval, I'm a little bit of a doomer myself. I think there's a lot to worry about here.
I know that about you, Warren. Whether it's AI or anything else, you're a little bit of a doomer. And I'm a little bit more, I won't say a utopian, but I'm certainly interested in how, as in every situation where there is risk, we see the opportunity, and we see that opportunity for everybody, not just the folks who are inventing and developing AI. And that's a lot about what this is, right? Where is that place in the middle where we can find a way that is good for more people with the introduction of AI into our society? How do we make the very most of it? And how do we anticipate that, rather than just trying to pick up the pieces of whatever damage is done?
Well, amen to that, Deval. One thing that I've learned as an impact investor this last decade or so is that there's a lot of value to starting in the middle, to seeing both the upsides and the risks. And there's a lot of value to planning. And I hope if we achieve one thing in this podcast, we help to shed some light on the most important questions facing us with regards to AI and its impact on workers. And that we help ourselves and others to think about these questions more deeply, so that we can actually get ahead of the things that are coming.
Exactly. How not to be careless, frankly. And so, seduced by the potential of AI, that we outsource human judgment and creativity, thoughtfulness, compassion, frankly, the things that make life rich and worthwhile. I want to be careful about being overgeneral here, but overly general, in part because some of the same folks who are developing AI are the ones who developed other technologies like social media, claiming, as they did about social media, that it will solve all our ills. And I think the idea of sort of outsourcing judgment and creativity and compassion and thoughtfulness to even the best technology is a risk we ought not take.
One of the things you hear a lot when you hear folks from Silicon Valley talk about AI and what it's going to do to the future of work is, we've been here before. There was an industrial revolution where people who used to do a lot of things by hand, the weavers and the like, found that machines could do a better job and a faster job and a cheaper job. Now that had big dislocations, but somehow we found other things to do, and now we've got an economy that's mostly about services. It's mostly about human beings doing things for other human beings that that machines can't do. And so the positive side of all this is maybe we've been here before. Humans always find something more to do,
Right.
which I suppose we can take some comfort in.
I think that's right. The humans, I mean, that's one of the most magical things about human creativity. We find a way. We adapt. But I think one of the things that we want to confront in this podcast series and in the conversations with our guests is how often it is we deal with the consequences of this new technology, these new breakthroughs, after uh, going a little crazy, a little wild, and a little drunk on them, rather than trying to think about them in advance so that we bring people along. And as much as possible, we prepare for the consequences.
Now, Deval, you've been a policymaker, and you travel today in policymaking circles. What are you hearing?
They too are just overwhelmed by the language, by the possibilities, by the predictions and warnings around AI, and by the representations that it is coming so fast that policymakers can't keep up with it. That latter part, I think, may be true, which is why I think trying to regulate at the level of the minutest detail is probably really, really hard to do. But some guardrails seem wise. I just don't know yet what they are. And I think a lot of policymakers who want to be helpful, who want to address consequences through anticipation rather than impact later on, are also struggling.
And I think there's a danger here where you've said before that policy often lags the problem to some degree. There's a necessary sort of time it takes for policymakers to react to things. And in a fast-moving technology like AI, where the changes could come at us much more quickly than changes have come in the past, I think that there's a additional worry here where some amount of forecasting, some amount of prognostication is necessary if we're going to actually get ahead of the ills that may come at us fast and furious.
Yes, as long as we make adjustments as we go along. And I think the same is true in business, Warren, where you and I both spend a lot of time. What are you hearing from other business leaders about the introduction and the onset and the flourishing of AI?
Well, what I'd say is that just about every board at just about every company, this is one of the main topics being discussed. And of course, the boards I'm most familiar with are boards that are involved with private equity one way or another. And so these are very active board members. And so there's a lot of conversation happening at that level around what to do. But I have not yet met folks who feel like they've got it all under control, that they really understand what they need to do, even with their own companies and with their own governance roles, let alone what the broader impacts can be. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done at just about every company, at just about every board, to truly define what the opportunity is and what it means for the workers at those companies. And I will say that as someone who's been involved in impact investing, social impact investing for a while, one of the most important things you can do when big change is coming is to be as planful as possible, so that you're not being reactive. Because when you react, that's when there's there tends to be a lot more damage to workers, damage to companies. And so we're trying to help our companies think ahead, really get ahead of the changes that are likely to come at them in the next 3 years.
Well, this is, you and I have worked together in impact investing, and one of the central premises I know we share is that there is greater value in long-term thinking and planning than there is in short-term harvesting of short-term gains. And this notion of trying to be planful, hard as it is really a lot about what impact investing is or ought to be about.
And what responsibility do you think investors and companies have here? I mean, I think I feel like one of the most important things that we can do is to help companies to plan and to make explicit the kinds of trade-offs that they're going to face, and also really to highlight the opportunities for augmentation of human labor for our companies. I think
Exactly. Yep.
there tends to be a short-term reflex in our economy towards the easy gains, the sugar high of cost cutting. And
Hmm.
I think as we look to hopefully as we look to bring light on how companies are approaching this question of AI in their workflows, we can shed light on the opportunity to augment human labor as opposed to just replace it. Because I think if we're headed to a world where augmentation is the chief order of the day, we might end up with the same number of people employed, but just tons more output. Tons more and better output in our economy, which would be a good thing for, I think, a good thing for everybody. But that's not always where our economy ends up when these kinds of opportunities arise.
Well, sometimes it is, though, right? I mean, I think you and I have talked about that article of many decades ago when ATM cash machines were first introduced. And I think it was a New York Times magazine cover, Sunday magazine cover, that said, it was the end of tellers in banks, and that the employment in banking would go down dramatically. And I think there are, hundreds of thousands of ATMs around the United States today, and 3 or 4 times as many people working in banking as there were at the time. There are adaptations. They're not all the same jobs, to be sure. But this is the point. How do you think about using AI to expand opportunity? How do you think about using AI to make it possible for a person who's delivering home care, for example, or medical care in a hospital to spend more time delivering care than on the paperwork and record keeping associated with that, rather than just how do we think about replacing people? How do we get greater productivity, which is another channel, right, to making money? So it's completely consistent with value creation.
One of the things that's been in the news recently is that I think there was a study that came out of MIT that said that something like 95% of AI implementations at companies so far have failed. Which I think is an interesting observation. I wonder if that number's right, but even if it's a large percentage have failed, one of the things that I think is poorly understood sometimes at the board level is any change that AI is going to make to workflows, anything that you're asking your people to adapt to and to adopt, requires buy-in from your companies. It requires actually doing the hard work of creating alignment, not just with your board, not just with your senior leadership team, but all the way up and down the company. Right. Which means that your workers, your employees, your partners have to feel like they've got a stake in all of this. And that's not an easy thing to do, because I think a lot of people look at AI and they see threat. Right. And I don't know, in your work, Deval, I know you've done a lot to address that, but I feel like that's a really important thing that sometimes gets missed. People focus so much on the technology and not enough on the human side.
Well, I think you're right, Warren, and I think in this respect, I'd say people focus so much on the edict from the top, and not on how important it is, as you say, to get buy-in from the folks who actually have to do it. And it's one of the things I've noticed is true of both big government and big business. There are folks who sit at the top of these organizations. I have sat at the top of those kinds of organizations and issued orders expecting that because they came from the top, they would be implemented immediately and precisely and successfully, when in fact the time taken to engage the folks who actually have to do the work is so valuable, not just as a gesture, although I think that gesture of respect is incredibly important, but because it also helps you understand how more successfully to implement the idea. You find out, it's been tried before and this is why it didn't work. So you need to clear that barrier, or that there are all these other things on top of which this new edict has come. So you have to figure out what you can clear away to make it very, very practical ways in which we engage each other as human beings to get investment in a common outcome, whether that's in business or in government and policy making. And I'll tell you, look, there are lots of ways right now that I am learning to use AI to harvest a tremendous amount of data and do simple analytics that create context that is so much faster now, provided you check its accuracy, is so much faster now than it would have been, just a little while ago. And I think, learning how to make the most of AI in that way has been a real learning for me, a real help for me. But it's also true, as you said, and I sit in those same boardrooms and cafeterias and so forth, where folks are talking about, all the AI hype, and they have to have some hype because if they don't, it'll seem like they're stuck. But we're sometimes wasting money. I'm all for trying things, but I want us to learn from the experiences that others have had, and try to be as smart and as incisive as possible as we figure out how to apply AI.
Now, Deval, we've talked a little bit about policy. We've talked a little bit about, and I'm really excited. We've got some great guests coming up on the policy front. In particular, our friend Brian Deese, who was a senior economic advisor to the Biden administration, and before that, the Obama administration. We've talked a little bit about the role of investors. We've got a great guest in David Rue, one of the founders of Silver Lake and founders of Baypine, who's going to be chatting with us about that. We've got great business thinkers like the former head of strategy at Bain and Company, Chris Zook, who will be telling us about how businesses see the opportunity and realize the opportunity. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is individuals. And I've got children, you've got children, and I actually spend quite a bit of time with people. I teach a course at NYU on the future of work, and we get asked all the time, what does this technology mean for me, especially for young people entering the workforce? And there's been some news lately that I think actually there was an academic report that came out called "The Canary in the Coal Mines," talking about how young people are struggling to find work, and particularly young people in professions affected by AI. And one of the things I hope we'll be able to illuminate through the course of this first season is what this means for individuals, what AI and its changes to the workforce means for individuals, how you can future-proof your own career, and how to think about, maybe learning to code isn't quite as important as it was 20 years ago, but there are all kinds of other things that kind of technical understanding can inform in different kinds of jobs. And so, anyway, this human side to the question and how it affects individuals, I think, is it's part of the reason why I'm so excited about this.
Well, it's the reason why I agreed to do this with you, Warren. I'd like to have something to say to my children and grandchildren. I don't have an answer right now, and I think the great advantage of doing this in the way we have is that our guests are way smarter than we are. You are very smart, but way smarter even than you, Warren, and they've thought about some of these issues really deeply, and anticipated both some of the upsides and some of the downsides. And I think as we work our way through this series and these conversations, I'm hoping that as I say, I will have more thoughtful answers for my own family and my own younger friends about how they should be thinking about making the most of their futures.
And maybe that's a good place to start with. Would you mind, Deval, sharing a little bit about your background and maybe a little bit about your hopes for this, in addition to what you just described?
So, Warren's weird sense of humor is something I got to know, some while ago when we together stood up an impact investing fund at Bain Capital, the first of its kind in an institutional investment firm, and we grew that team and grew that fund and had some great success and a whole lot of learning and associations with some amazing people. Warren, you went off, and you'll say more about this, to do some other things before you came back to impact investing. I am an impact investor even today, but at a different firm, the Vistria Group in Chicago. I came to impact investing through exposure to something called social impact bonds during my 2 terms as governor of Massachusetts. And I've been really interested in innovations in public policy, not as an elected official, but as someone who is an interested citizen. Being governor was my first time in elective office. Before that, I'd been a partner in 2 Boston law firms, an executive in 2 Fortune 50 companies. I've been head of the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department under President Bill Clinton. That's back when the Civil Rights Division was in the civil rights business, I'm proud to say. And otherwise, what else can I say? I grew up on the south side of Chicago, have had a life living the American dream, and I feel very blessed about that. And I've been concerned for some while that that dream is disappearing for people, not just from the south side of Chicago, but all over the country. So here we are at another great crossroads where there is opportunity as well as risk. And for me, trying to think through how AI can enable upward economic mobility for more people rather than just displace people, which is where most of the conversation seems to have been, has a lot to do with why I want to participate. So that's my background, why I'm excited to be doing this with you, Warren, and over to you. Tell us about you.
Well, Deval, you have been a wonderful mentor to me, and I've had such an exciting change in my career since I met you. A little over, I think, 10 years ago. But my background, I grew up in Canada, but I too have since been living the American dream. So I went to college in the States, and then I spent 25 years at companies called Bain. So I was a consultant at Bain and Company, and then I was at Bain Capital doing investing at different places around the world. But a big change in my life happened about 10 years ago when I first met Deval. He asked me to come and help him to start this social impact investing group. And I had always thought that investing can be a force for good. It often is when it's done properly. But the idea of actually measuring the impact, the social impact, environmental impact of the businesses we invested in as part of our job struck me as really, really exciting. And it struck me as something that, frankly, all investors and all companies should be moving towards. And so that was a big eye opener for me. I've spent most of the last 10 years investing like that. I left Bain Capital to join a firm called 2 Sigma. 2 Sigma is a large investment group focused primarily on liquid markets, public stocks in New York. And that was a wonderful place to be for lots of reasons. But one of the reasons is it gave me something of a technical education because a lot of what they do uses data science. And so I was sort of marinating in that world for 5 years. And I now run a business called Future of Work Partners. And our mission is to build great companies that are aligned with the future of work. And what that means for us is investing in and helping to build companies that not only have a good job strategy, but where they think of that good job strategy, not just in terms of making things good for their workers, but also enabling their workers to reach their full potential by using technology and other tools. And so as we do that work, one of the things that has come home to me is that a lot of change is coming. I happen to think a lot of change is coming very fast.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest debates out there right now about AI are not what its full potential can be. I think just about everybody agrees that the potential of AI is enormous. The biggest debates about AI today are more about the pace of change and our ability, our institution's ability to adapt depending on what that pace is. I happen to think that the pace is going to be fast. We'll have debates about that, how fast it'll be. But even if it is slow, we're talking 10 years instead of 5. We're not talking 30 or 40 years.
Right.
And so to me, this is a really important conversation to be having now because change is coming at us much faster than previous changes have come. the offshoring, deindustrialization of America took, at least 30 years. This is going to happen faster than that. And I also agree with you, Deval. There is enormous potential in this technology, enormous. If this is used at its fullest potential, we could be actually heading to some real sunlit uplands for all kinds of folks, and the recreation of the American dream for many people like the young Deval and the young Warren. But it's not inevitable that happens.
Right.
And we are at a moment where I think a lot of decisions are going to help to shape that future. And I'd like to help add to that conversation to the extent that I can. So that's a big part of the reason why I'm so proud to be doing this with you. And I'm so grateful for your mentorship over the years that I've known you, Deval.
Well, we've learned a ton from each other, and we've learned a ton alongside each other as well. And I think we will in this podcast too. And for just those reasons, what's motivating both of us, and I think this is important to say again, is how do we find opportunity that benefits all of us? And we don't just want to be about concentrating more and more wealth in fewer and fewer hands. We want to figure out, how do you use the disruption that comes and is coming from AI to enable everybody, not just the mighty, but the meek too, to see a way forward. We've got a terrific lineup of guests, some leading thought leaders. Why don't you list some of those names, Warren?
Yeah, well, I'm excited to say our first episode is going to be with the great technology thought leader and Stanford professor, entrepreneur, Eric Brynjolfsson. He's the head of Stanford's Digital Economy Lab, and he's doing a lot of really interesting things. He'll help to put some of the technology in context for us and to understand what the full potential of AI is likely to be. I mentioned earlier, we'll have Brian Deese, the former director of the National Economic Council. He's also, he's been involved in 2 administrations. He's doing some really interesting stuff in his investment life right now. We'll have a number of other guests, including serial entrepreneur Amir Hussain, who has just published a book called The Cybernetic Society. And so, we'll be attacking this from many angles. We'll also have guests from organized labor, from the foundation world. And I just think this 360 view, I hope, will help to shed some light on both the potential and the risks.
Well, and I think, in addition to those guests, you and I, at the end of each broadcast, we'll have some time to talk about AI news analysis, sort of our take on the weird and wonderful happenings of the week. And maybe even as we get further along, we'll have a way to harvest some of the questions or comments that come in from listeners and react to those as well, which should be fun.
Deval, we plan to cover a variety of hot topics, including AI automation, job losses, the impact on economic equality or inequality, what this means for workers, their skills, what role education can play in helping to upskill workers, the impact of remote work, and then, the impact of all of this on our fragile democracy. And we'll even be talking about some of the terms of art out there, like brain rot, which apparently, according to my children, means how a wealth of information can lead to a poverty of attention and imagination.
Ooh-wee. That is the last thing we need in a society that has a famously short attention span. Something to terrorize my children with, I guess. We've got a great lineup of guests who really bring the wisdom and the substance to these conversations, around which then we hope to, find some solutions and some common ground.
Deval, I can't wait to get started. Next week, we kick off with my dear friend, Eric Brynjolfsson.
He's Warren Valdmanis.
And that's our friend, Deval Patrick.
See you next week.